Sauron's grasp stretched much further than the lands of Gondor and Rohan alone. And his forces might have done great evil in the north of Middle-earth, had a handful of heroes not stood in his path.
There's only so much of the War of the Rings that games can mine without the risk of running roughshod on the Tolkien canon. The Lord of the Rings War in the North wisely focuses on an aspect of fantasy's most storied conflict that was only hinted at in the books. Conveniently for Snowblind's latest hack-and-slash RPG, the Northern Front was evidently a bloody one. Does it succeed at expanding the Tolkien legendarium, or will you end up feeling like you're controlling Middle-earth's B-team?
Our folk could not hope to stand against the Nine together.
I will gladly do whatever you command.
I'm a part of this now as well.
Then we three are of one mind.
In the role of either Aredin the Ranger, Andriel the Lore Master, or Farin the Dwarf, it's your job to track down and eliminate the vile Agandaur, a human servant of Sauron who shares his Dark Lord's silhouette, as well as his predilection for conquest and subjugation. In the course of things, you'll be running interference for the Fellowship, visiting storied sites, and generally ridding them of orcs, goblins, wights, and spiders, and even some wicked men.
These lands have known peace for too long.
If the no-name protagonists have led you to expect an experience free of notable personages, you'll be surprised at how often you'll get to hobnob with Middle-earth's bigwigs. And all business hack-and-slash this ain't. There's actually quite a bit of talking in War in the North, and the world's famous lore masters live up to their title. If you're game to hear it, the likes of Elrond and Gandalf will happily hold court and drop copious quantities of mythology, sounding like reasonable facsimiles of their big-screen counterparts in the process.
There you will find Gandalf the Grey.
Even your valorous feathered friends are blessed with silver tongues, though their dignified, fully human voices and oddly articulated mouths will surely make you chuckle.
The great eagles of the north speak as well as any man.
You won't be surprised by War in the North's form. You basically trample through linear environments while dispatching relentless hordes of enemies and relieving them of their loot. Aside from frequent, brief detours to claim hidden treasures and the odd spontaneously discovered side quest, it's all about forward momentum. You'll also come across various settlements in your travels where you can repair and re-equip, as well as chat with Middle-earth's loquacious locals. These towns are expansively realized, particularly Rivendell, and it's frankly surprising as they're basically a sideshow. You only really need to visit them when dictated by the story or a quest, or when your gear is busted. Otherwise, you're just as good unloading excess loot at the Phantom shops located at the end of most stages. Unfortunately, they don't do repairs. The game's MO is to basically bombard you with waves upon waves of enemies, though it tries its best to mix up the compositions of the hordes, from weenies and heavily armored skirmishers that bear down at you, to archers and magic users that harry you from a distance. There simply isn't enough variety to keep things interesting in the long run. After your 10th troll, they just cease feeling momentous. In some levels, the savage orcs and baleful men are switched up for undead or spiders, but the differences are largely superficial. The boss fights are a bit by the numbers as well. One particular template is reused for 3 different encounters. As is often the case with these types of games, you can forgive a lot when you're in the midst of the loot chase with friends. War in the North does a good job of enabling co-op play both online and locally. Up to 3 players are able to join the fray online, and 2 via split screen, with AI picking up any vacant roles. Once you finish the 10 to 12 hour story, you can restart it on higher difficulty levels with commensurate loot rewards. And given that a single playthrough will put you at around level 20, you'll have quite a bit to work through if you want to hit the 40 cap. War in the North is mechanically a bit more ambitious than your typical hack and slash, though an overall lack of polish will frequently bring you back down to earth from the throes of bloodlust. Beat on enemies enough and they'll become vulnerable to a critical hit. Land the crit on them and you go into hero mode, which makes your attacks more effective and grants you increasing amounts of bonus XP the longer you keep the chain going. All of the characters have a ranged weapon at their disposal, and the game does a good job of incentivizing the potshots by sprinkling the battlefield with stationary ranged units beyond sword's reach. Switching to your ranged weapon is seamless, and does decent damage even if you don't dump a whole lot of points into the relevant talents. The game's combat has a lot of things going for it. The multitude of skills that your characters accumulate as you level go a long way towards keeping you present and engaged, which is perhaps more than your homogeneous opposition deserves. Likewise, the feeling of calling in Belaram, your noble aquiline ally, for a devastating, well-animated dive bomb never gets old. It's a multitude of smaller things that bring the experience down.
A breeding ground for trolls and orcs.
Blocking enemy attacks never feels truly effective, and by the same token, some enemies will frequently fall into a defensive posture that isn't adequately telegraphed, which results in you essentially beating against a brick wall until you notice that numbers have stopped appearing over their heads. The funky collision detection doesn't do the game any favors either. Far too often you'll try to engage an enemy and end up slashing air because an ally was a foot or two in the wrong place. Games like this thrive on precision, and when it isn't there, it really puts a damper on the experience. War in the North looks good enough from a distance, entirely informed by the Peter Jackson film's interpretation of the Tolkien mythology. From a stylistic standpoint, everything looks the part, which is especially evident when you notice just how dramatically your character's looks change when they get new gear. The graphics aren't so deeply impressive when you look up close, though, with hair looking particularly weird. For a world with such a hirsute population, this is bad news. Technically, the game is an uneven performer, with dips and stutters a little too common, and attack animations that often fail to match the weapon that the characters are wielding.
Can't take much more!
The hack and slash category isn't exactly thriving on consoles these days, so if you've been hard up for a cooperative loot bonanza, War in the North is worth sinking a weekend into. Its lack of variety and polish, however, makes it hard to imagine it having any sort of longevity. Unless you're thrilled by the idea of exploring Snowblind's take on this corner of Middle-earth, you should approach with caution.
Now I must depart.